There are things we all think, but don't always say out loud. Is this normal? Why am I feeling so overwhelmed? Shouldn't I be able to handle this? If you've ever wondered, am I the only one feeling this way? You're not. Let's talk about it. Needing support doesn't end once you're grown. I'm here today with Dionna Adie, a clinical supervisor at OhioGuidestone. Dionna, thank you so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
You've worked with adults across different stages of life, including older adults. What stands out to you about mental health as people age?
Well, I would say that no matter how old we are, there is a need for emotional support. And as we age, a lot of things change. Our bodies can change, and supports that we used to have, we may not have those supports anymore.
Right.
So I think the important thing is that people pay attention to their mental health. And unfortunately, sometimes people feel like I should have it together. I should be able to handle this. I'm an adult. Yeah. I should have the resources to deal with this. But sometimes that may not be the case, because when I think of the pressures that adults have to deal with,
Absolutely.
Paying bills, taking care of kids, sometimes some adults are sandwiched, meaning that, they are not just taking care of kids, but they're also taking care of aging parents. That's a lot,
It is.
And when you're an adult, sometimes you may put yourself last. And then you realize that you're struggling. So there's just a lot of pressure, but the important thing is to know that no matter how old we are, even as an older adult, when I think of our seniors, we still need that emotional support. And, just as we, take care of our physical health, our medical needs, our emotional and mental health is just as important.
Absolutely. And I can really relate with that, Dionna. I think looking at my own self, as an adult, I felt like, I should be able to handle everything on my own.
Right.
Where does that mindset come from?
I think just with the myth of, believing that as an adult, okay, I am an adult, I should be able to handle this, right? But that is just not reality. We all will go through challenges and difficulties in our lives. And sometimes we may not be prepared to deal with that. And we may need additional support. Unfortunately, in some cultures and in some communities, reaching out for mental health is stigmatized. When I think of the African-American community especially, there can be quite a bit of stigma in that people may feel pressured that, you just need to pray or you just need to go to church. But sometimes you need more than that. Yeah. So, just helping people realize that, dealing with stressors and challenges is not something that you have to deal with alone.
And what is, I guess, in your opinion, what does burnout look like? I mean, sometimes it's hard for people to know, am I taking on too much? There's so many moving parts and pieces. How do you, I might have to go back and do this one, but when balancing work, family, and caregiving, what does burnout look like in adulthood?
Yeah, so it can look very different because people are different. So the way that burnout looks, one example could be that, people are kind of maybe isolating more, maybe withdrawn. Maybe they're struggling with sleeping. So it can look very different in different people. So it just depends on that individual. So that's why it's so important to be in touch with how am I feeling? How am I doing? Because as we, kind of go through our day and we see people and how are you? Sometimes people aren't upfront and honest about that. Oh, I'm okay. But they may not be. And the face of struggle, when people are struggling emotionally, sometimes people may wear a mask and pretend like they're doing okay. But inside, they know that they're struggling. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's so much stigma around mental health that will cause people to hesitate to reach out for professional help. So sometimes it will take a crisis for people to realize that I need more help than my friends and family. I really do think I need to talk to a professional.
Absolutely. And I can relate with that. You know, I remember several years ago when my twins were first born and my oldest was 3 and we were juggling so much at home. And I was so overwhelmed with anxiety and depression. And I just didn't pump the brakes to say, you know, this is where I'm at and that's okay, but I need to reach out and get that help. Depression always doesn't look like sadness, right?
Absolutely.
What are some ways that it shows up that people might miss?
Absolutely. So depression can sometimes surface as people being irritable. You know, their patience may not be, you know, as long as it used to be. So they may have short patience with people. They may not be able to tolerate when those unexpected things happen. So depression, you know, can look very different. And the one thing that, you know, I have kind of learned just being a clinician is that people have this myth about what depression looks like. They think that people look sad, that they cry a lot, you know, but that's not necessarily the case. You know, people can smile and laugh and go about their typical day and work and interact with people, but inside they may be really, really, you know, struggling with how they're feeling and hesitating to share that, you know, with others. So irritability is one symptom of depression that people may not be aware of. What else? Getting angry very easily too, you know. So as I mentioned, having, you know, short patience. So the biggest message that I want to send is that depression does not look the same in everyone. There are different types of depression. You know, when I think of mothers that give birth, there's postpartum depression. So that, you know, that will look different in different individuals. People may have a more severe depression where it's hard for them to function, to get out of bed, to take care of themselves, to go to work. You know, so again, when I think of depression, I think of it as a spectrum of symptoms that can vary, you know, by that, you know, with individuals. So it just depends.
It really does. And I think you mentioned earlier that it affects folks in all stages of life.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's really important to think about because I think sometimes, you know, you talked a little bit about stigmas, you know, you think adolescents, you know, they have depression but really people that move in even the later stages of life struggle with this. And what are some of the emotional challenges that they may face as folks are in that later stage of their life? Absolutely.
So, you know, I had talked about this earlier that as we get older, things change. You know, things change in many ways. And in older adults, they may start to face increased health challenges. So maybe they have new conditions. For example, it's pretty common when people are diagnosed with a chronic condition like diabetes or heart disease, that can trigger some depression-like symptoms. So for older adults, it's really, really challenging because not only are they dealing with challenges with their health that may be changing as they get older, but also supports change too. You know, their family makeup may change. So they may not, you know, have that contact with their children. Maybe their children are adults now and they've moved away. So one of the things that I see, especially in older adults and our senior adults, is just the challenge of loneliness, of, you know, being alone quite a bit. And really not knowing how do I deal with that? How can I just, you know, have that social interaction that I need? So, and that applies to our seniors that live in the community in their own homes, or even seniors in facilities. Because I think it's important that even as people transition from having their independence to, you know, maybe something changes with their health and they now need to be in a nursing facility, that across those transitions that they have the support that they need. And when I say support, I mean that emotional support.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and one of the things that I love about OhioGuidestone is that we meet clients where they are, you know. So if we need to see seniors that live in the community, you know, we go to their home, we provide home visits, but we pay attention to how are they doing as far as like their mood, you know, what can we help them with as far as resources so that they don't feel so isolated and lonely. daily.
Right.
And then with our seniors, for the seniors that live in nursing facilities, one of the things that I really like to explore is, how did this happen? What was that transition like for you? Because for some seniors, it can be pretty traumatic. It could have been, it could have been a fall that caused them to, have to be hospitalized and then transferred to like a rehab. And then sometimes, unfortunately, it may not be safe for them to go back home.
Yeah.
And they may need around the clock, 24/7 care. And that is a big change from living in your home, doing for yourself, and now you're in a facility and you're dependent on other people. So there are a lot of challenges that can come as we get older. But no matter, again, as I said earlier, how old we are, we still need that emotional support. And it's so important for us to pay attention to our mental health.
Absolutely. And, I think back on my own family, from when my dad retired. He went from 40, 50 hours a week to, being home.
Yes.
And now what to do.
Right.
And he was still functioning, showing up day to day. But, he wasn't. Well, he was showing signs later, hindsight 2020, that he needed some support. But for the other folks out there, what are some signs that they may need support, even if they are still showing up, functioning day to day?
Yeah. So to pay attention to, I think it's important for people to pay attention to, okay, I'm still functioning, but how am I functioning and how am I feeling? How am I sleeping? How am I interacting with people? How motivated, do I feel?
Right.
Am I getting some enjoyment out of life? Right. What are my leisure activities like? Because retirement, for most of us, is something to get excited about. However, there's another side, as you mentioned, like with your dad. Some people really struggle with that, and they find themselves feeling lost, and and needing to have that just feel of having a purpose. So I think that it's important to, again, just ask those questions, to take like a deep dive into how are you doing emotionally, and to be very direct about that. Yeah. So.
Well, I will follow that up with, he is now the world's #1 grandfather and the best gardener on the west side of Cleveland.
Oh, that's great.
He does flowers and vegetables every year, and we always have way too many tomatoes and garlic cloves than we ever need. So he's found a way to enjoy.
If you're listening to this Let's Talk About It podcast, chances are you're passionate about mental health, and you may even feel called to work in this field. At Ohio Guidestone, we say yes to those who want to make a difference in our communities. And we're currently hiring behavioral health specialists, therapists, and other roles across Ohio. Ohio Guidestone offers a meaningful work experience, flexible schedules, and comprehensive benefits, all while working alongside supportive teams with opportunities to grow. Full and part-time positions are available. If you're looking for a career where you can make a difference, visit ohioguidestone.org/careers to see our current opportunities and apply today.
Himself. On the other side of things, my partner's grandfather recently transitioned into an assisted living facility, and he's 98. So he's been very independent his entire life.
Yes.
He's handled things pretty well. But, one question that I have is for people caring for others, aging family members, how does that affect their own mental health? And what would be some tips you would have for them?
Absolutely. So caregiving, can really be difficult at times. And one of the things that can really impact that caregiver is they may put their needs on the back burner.
Right.
They may forget to take care of themselves.
Right.
So one of the things that is important for caregivers to pay attention to is, am I having a break? When is someone also helping me? But it's so important for them to look at, how am I, just kind of taking care of myself as I'm caregiving, and not forget to, kind of take care of their own needs as well.
So backpedaling a little bit, we talked about taking so much on, right? And I can relate with that as when I was a young adult. Now I consider myself a seasoned adult.
Right.
I was raised to kind of push through, right? And that was, you'll be okay. You get up and you fight another day. When someone's feeling overwhelmed with work and family and other responsibilities, what's the risk in pushing through?
The risk is that, it may become harder to function. It may become harder to function. And one of the things that we see in our adult population is that they may rely on other kind of substances to deal with, feeling overwhelmed. So it is not uncommon for people to, they may notice that they're drinking more alcohol, to cope, to unwind,
right.
To even sleep, not realizing that alcohol is going to disrupt, their sleep pattern. So the likelihood that people may just really start to struggle even more with the way that they're functioning if they don't pay attention to how they're doing is just a huge risk. Right.
And drinking alcohol, for example, is like, borrowing $1 today and then having to pay back $10,000 tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Really, because it doesn't help in the short term. For folks that are struggling, what are some practical ways that they can take care of their mental health right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I really, really encourage people to do is to make sure that they have, time that they can really just decompress, to have that enjoyable relaxation time, to make sure that they're focusing on themselves. And to make sure also that they have the supports that they need.
Sure.
And that may be limited for some people. So, they may not have friends or families that feel that mental health is important, or they may be surrounded by people that think that, seeking professional help is a sign of weakness, and it's not,
No.
So one of the things that they can, really do to pay attention to how they're feeling is to just stay in touch with how am I doing today? And when people ask me, how am I doing? Just be honest. If you're struggling, to share that with people that but most importantly, reach out for professional help, because at OhioGuidestone, we serve all ages, from our youth, our children, adolescents, and even with our adults, young adults, so whatever lifespan, a person finds himself, we have so many different services that can help them, including substance use disorder services as well.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about it a couple times, the stigma around mental health and getting mental health. Myself personally, I look at going to therapy as going to your dentist, going to your family practitioner.
Absolutely.
It's nothing that you should be embarrassed about. I myself have struggled with anxiety my whole adult life.
Yes.
And as a kid of the 80s, when I had my first anxiety attack, the nurse said, "Oh, he's faking it. It's not real."
Right.
And I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, but how does someone go for, I should be able to handle this on my own to I'm going to reach out for help? What would you tell that person?
Yeah. So I would tell them, actually, the first thing I would want to do is just, compliment them and just let them know that's a sign of strength.
Love that.
And it's courageous.
Yeah.
To, just to pause and say, I need more help. What I'm doing is not enough. The supports that I have, family, friends, I need more.
Right.
And one of the things, another thing that I love about OhioGuidestone is how easy it is to access services.
Yes.
The fact that we have walk-in clinics at multiple locations. So if, someone decides that I need help, I need to do this, they can walk to one, they can come to one of our walk-in clinics and they can have an intake appointment that same day. So we value and prioritize trying to make sure that, people in our community can access services very quickly and get the help that they need.
For someone listening right now who might feel anxious or exhausted, just overwhelmed with day-to-day life, what would you want them to hear?
Yes. I would want them to hear that there's hope, that there's, yeah, absolutely, that things can change, that the way you're feeling right now doesn't have to, remain that way.
Right.
That, sometimes adults feel like, well, I guess this is being a grown up. This is my life now.
Sure.
But that is, definitely not the case. And things can improve and things can be different.
Right.
And there's just so many resources and supports and so many levels of help out there to not be ashamed and to know that you deserve this.
Right. And no one's an island.
Absolutely.
It takes a village.
Yep.
And the help is out there if you reach out. Dionna, I want to thank you. This was an important conversation. If you're listening and feel overwhelmed, you're not alone. Support is available. Visit OhioGuidestone.org for more information. I'm your host, Derek Rader. Have a great day because you deserve it.